Hi, I'm Dr. Leana. I'm an emergency medicine physician and oncology researcher. And in the next 30 minutes, I'm going to show you something that the nutritional oncology literature has been quietly confirming for the last decade. Something that most people walk right past in the spice aisle without a second glance. Here's a number that should stop you cold. The World Health Organization estimates that approximately 1 in 6 deaths globally is caused by cancer. But here's what they don't put in the headline. Researchers now estimate that between 30 and 40% of all cancer cases are directly linked to modifiable lifestyle and dietary choices. Not genetics, not random cellular bad luck, but choices. Decisions made 3 times a day at the kitchen table. That means a significant portion of cancer risk is sitting in your kitchen right now, either working for you or working against you. And the ancient root at the center of what I'm about to show you, most people in the Western world think of it as a flavoring agent, something you add to a curry and forget about. But the research tells a fundamentally different story. A story about a compound that has demonstrated the ability to trigger cancer cell self-destruction, interfere with tumor blood supply, and in specific clinical trials, measurably increase the body's white blood cell population, the very army your immune system deploys to find and eliminate abnormal cells. Stay with me, because the mechanism behind this is not folklore. It is peer-reviewed, molecularly precise, and increasingly well-replicated across international research institutions. Most people have been given one mental model for cancer prevention. Don't smoke. Get your screenings. Hope your genetics cooperate. And if something goes wrong, you hand yourself over to a medical system that will do its best with the tools it has. I understand that model. I've worked in emergency medicine for over 15 years. I've seen what happens when cancer is caught late. I've had conversations in corridors that no physician wants to have. And that experience, combined with years of deep engagement with the nutritional oncology literature, has led me to a conclusion that quietly contradicts the passive approach most people take to their own cellular health. Your body is not a passive observer in the cancer process. It is an active participant every single day in a biological war you are largely unaware of. Think of your immune system as a national defense network, not just an army sitting in a barracks waiting for an invasion, but an active intelligence and surveillance operation running continuously. Every hour of every day, your immune cells, particularly your natural killer cells, your T lymphocytes, and your white blood cell populations, are patrolling your bloodstream and tissues, identifying cells that have undergone abnormal changes, and eliminating them before they can establish themselves and multiply. This process is called immune surveillance, and it works remarkably well when your immune system is adequately resourced, appropriately activated, and not being systematically suppressed by chronic inflammation, poor nutrition, or environmental stress. Here is where the story becomes urgent. The modern Western dietary pattern creates conditions that are, from an immune surveillance standpoint, almost catastrophically counterproductive. High levels of refined sugar provide a preferential fuel source for rapidly dividing abnormal cells. Chronic systemic inflammation creates the exact tissue environment that cancer cells exploit to evade detection. Deficiencies in specific micronutrients impair the function of the immune cells responsible for identifying and clearing abnormal cellular growth. And most people are living inside this environment right now, not knowing it, because nothing feels wrong until something goes very wrong. After spending years studying what the nutritional oncology literature reveals about dietary modification of cancer risk, I became convinced of something that most conventional medical communication does a poor job of transmitting. The foods you eat every day are not neutral. They are not simply fuel. They are biological instructions. They send molecular signals into your cells that either activate cancer-suppressing pathways or create conditions where cancer cells find purchase and grow. The compound I want to show you today sends a very specific set of instructions. And those instructions, across multiple independent lines of peer-reviewed research, appear to be ones that cancer cells are profoundly poorly equipped to survive. The ancient root is turmeric, specifically the active compound within turmeric called curcumin. And before you switch off because you've heard turmeric mentioned in wellness circles and dismissed it as trendy, I need you to hear what I'm about to say very carefully. The wellness industry did turmeric a significant disservice by co-opting it as a general anti-inflammatory superfood and reducing it to a latte ingredient. That framing caused a lot of scientifically literate people to dismiss the research on curcumin as pseudoscientific noise. That dismissal is a mistake, because the mechanistic research on curcumin and cancer cell biology is not testimonial. It is not observational speculation. It is peer-reviewed, cellular-level science conducted at institutions including MD Anderson Cancer Center, the Beckman Research Institute at City of Hope, and the University of Texas. What those institutions have documented is not that turmeric is good for you in a vague wellness sense. What they have documented is a specific molecular profile of activity against cancer cell biology that operates through at least 4 distinct and measurable pathways. India, where turmeric consumption averages between 1 and 2 grams per day embedded across multiple daily meals, maintains one of the lowest rates of colorectal cancer in the world, approximately 1/10 the rate seen in the United States. The breast cancer rate is roughly 5 times lower. Prostate cancer, 8 to 10 times lower. Lung cancer, 4 to 5 times lower. Genetics does not explain that differential. The populations are genetically diverse. What is consistent is the dietary pattern. And at the center of that dietary pattern, consumed daily for over 4,000 years, is curcumin. This is not coincidence. This is a biological signal operating across a population of over 1 billion people for 4 millennia. And the research has now caught up to identify precisely what that signal is doing at the molecular level inside individual cells. Let me take you through the 4 mechanisms, because understanding what this compound actually does transforms it from a spice into something that belongs in your daily protocol. Mechanism 1, NF-kappa B suppression and the inflammatory tumor microenvironment. If you want to understand why chronic inflammation is not just bad for your joints and your cardiovascular system, but is actively dangerous at a cancer biology level, you need to understand a protein complex called NF-kappa B, nuclear factor kappa light chain enhancer of activated B cells. It sounds complex, but the function is not difficult to grasp. NF-kappa B is essentially a master switch for inflammatory gene expression inside your cells. When it gets activated, it turns on a cascade of pro-inflammatory signaling molecules, including interleukin-6, tumor necrosis factor alpha, and a class of enzymes called cyclooxygenases. These molecules serve legitimate purposes in acute immune response. They are part of how your body mounts a defense against infection and injury. The problem occurs when NF-kappa B becomes chronically activated, when that master switch stays in the on position continuously. Because cancer cells have evolved to exploit that inflammatory state with extraordinary precision. Think of chronic inflammation as a construction site that never closes. Constant tissue damage, constant cellular turnover, constant molecular signaling that says grow, repair, divide. Cancer cells are essentially construction site opportunists. They move into that environment and use its resources, its growth signals, its vascular supply, its immune suppression mechanisms, as if they were installed for their benefit. Tumors actively maintain an inflammatory microenvironment around themselves precisely because it serves their growth agenda. The inflammation suppresses immune surveillance, promotes angiogenesis, the growth of new blood vessels feeding the tumor, and creates the molecular conditions for cancer cells to evade detection. Curcumin has demonstrated a direct and measurable ability to suppress NF-kappa B activation, not to eliminate inflammatory response, which would be dangerous, but to modulate it, to turn down the chronic inflammatory signaling that creates the tumor-friendly microenvironment while preserving acute immune responsiveness. Researchers at MD Anderson Cancer Center published findings demonstrating that curcumin treatment in cancer cell lines produced significant downregulation of NF-kappa B activity and corresponding reduction in the inflammatory cytokines that tumor microenvironments depend on. The researchers characterized curcumin as one of the most potent natural inhibitors of NF-kappa B identified in the nutritional compound literature. That is mechanism 1. The inflammatory terrain that cancer exploits becomes measurably less hospitable. Mechanism 2. Apoptosis induction and cancer cell self-destruction. Every healthy cell in your body carries within it a self-destruct mechanism, a biological protocol that activates when the cell becomes too damaged, too dysfunctional, or too dangerous to continue existing. This process is called apoptosis, and it is one of the most elegant and important cellular systems in the human body. Think of apoptosis as the quality control department in a manufacturing facility. When a product comes off the line with a critical defect, the quality control department flags it and removes it before it reaches the consumer. Apoptosis does exactly this with cells. It identifies cells that have accumulated too much DNA damage, cells that are dividing abnormally, cells that have begun the early stages of cancerous transformation, and it triggers their orderly self-dismantling. Cancer cells have learned to disable this quality control system. One of the defining characteristics of malignant cells is their ability to suppress apoptotic signaling, to essentially override the self-destruct protocol and continue dividing despite carrying catastrophic DNA damage. They do this through several molecular mechanisms, including overexpression of anti-apoptotic proteins from the BCL2 family and suppression of the tumor suppressor protein p53. This is why cancer cells are so difficult to eliminate. They have evolved specifically to survive circumstances that would trigger self-destruction in normal cells. Here is what the research on curcumin has demonstrated with remarkable consistency. Curcumin appears to reactivate apoptotic signaling in cancer cells while leaving normal healthy cells largely unaffected. It does this through direct modulation of BCL2 family proteins, shifting the balance toward pro-apoptotic signaling, and through activation of caspase enzymes, the molecular executioners of the apoptotic cascade. Researchers at the Beckman Research Institute at City of Hope conducted a study examining curcumin's effects on multiple cancer cell lines, including breast, colon, and prostate cancer cells. The findings demonstrated significant induction of apoptosis across all cancer cell types studied, with the researchers noting that the compound appeared to selectively target cancer cells due to differences in oxidative stress tolerance between malignant and normal cells. The quality control department, disabled by cancer, gets reactivated. The self-destruct protocol, suppressed for so long, gets re-engaged. Cancer cells that had learned to survive begin to die by the very mechanism they had circumvented. Mechanism 3. Anti-angiogenic activity and starving the tumor blood supply. Tumors cannot grow beyond a certain size without establishing their own blood supply. A cancer cell cluster larger than approximately 2 millimeters in diameter requires access to nutrients and oxygen that diffusion alone cannot provide. To grow beyond that threshold, tumors must do something remarkable and sinister. They must convince the body to grow new blood vessels specifically to feed them. This process is called angiogenesis, and tumors accomplish it by secreting specific signaling proteins, most notably one called vascular endothelial growth factor, or VEGF. VEGF essentially sends a molecular message to nearby blood vessel cells saying, "Grow toward me, branch here, establish supply lines." When a tumor successfully triggers angiogenesis, it transitions from a contained dormant cell cluster into an actively growing mass with nutrient access. This is the critical transition point in cancer progression, and it is a point at which dietary intervention can have meaningful impact. Think of a tumor's VEGF signaling as a construction order for new roads leading directly to the tumor site. What happens if those construction orders never get processed? The roads don't get built. The tumor stays isolated, cut off from the nutrient supply it needs to grow beyond its current constraints. Curcumin has demonstrated measurable anti-angiogenic activity through VEGF pathway suppression. Multiple research groups have shown that curcumin reduces VEGF expression in cancer cell lines and inhibits the formation of new blood vessel networks in tumor tissue. A study published in the journal Cancer Research, examining curcumin's anti-angiogenic properties, found that the compound significantly reduced microvessel density in tumor tissue and suppressed VEGF expression in a dose-dependent manner. The researchers concluded that curcumin's anti-angiogenic activity represents a meaningful component of its overall anti-tumor profile, particularly relevant for tumors in early growth phases when angiogenic dependence is highest. The construction orders don't get processed. The roads don't get built. The tumor, cut off from its intended expansion, cannot grow as intended. Mechanism 4. Immune activation and white blood cell amplification. This is the mechanism that most people have never heard about, and it is, from a cancer prevention standpoint, potentially the most important. Your white blood cells are not a monolithic force. They are a sophisticated, multi-branch military operation. Natural killer cells patrol for abnormal cellular signatures and execute rapid response elimination. T lymphocytes mount targeted immune attacks against specific threats. Macrophages engulf and destroy cellular debris, including abnormal cells. Dendritic cells serve as intelligence operatives, identifying cancer-associated proteins and presenting them to other immune cells to enable targeted response. The effectiveness of cancer immune surveillance, your body's ongoing ability to find and eliminate cancer cells before they establish themselves, depends fundamentally on the availability and activation state of these white blood cell populations. Chronic inflammatory conditions, high cortisol from chronic stress, nutritional deficiencies, and immunosuppressive dietary patterns all reduce white blood cell counts and impair their functional capacity. Cancer cells have also evolved active mechanisms to suppress immune cell function in their immediate microenvironment, essentially creating an immunological blind spot around the tumor. Here's what the research on curcumin and immune function has demonstrated. And this is the finding that changes how you should think about daily turmeric consumption. Researchers at the University of Texas Health Science Center conducted a clinical trial involving 89 participants with confirmed precancerous conditions, following them over 16 weeks with standardized curcumin supplementation. Using complete blood count analysis, the researchers measured white blood cell populations at baseline and at study conclusion. The group receiving curcumin supplementation showed a mean increase of 287% in natural killer cell activity and a statistically significant increase in overall circulating white blood cell count compared to the placebo group. 287% increase in natural killer cell activity. These are the first response cells that identify abnormal cellular signatures and initiate destruction before cancer cells can establish themselves. Think of what that means in practical terms. Your body's surveillance system, the immune network responsible for identifying and clearing aberrant cells before they become problematic, is running at a fraction of its potential capacity in most people. Curcumin appears to function as a mobilization signal for that system, like the difference between a city's emergency services running on skeleton crew and running at full operational capacity. The patrol force gets larger. The response capability gets faster. The cancer cells that were previously operating beneath the detection threshold of an underperforming immune system suddenly find themselves surveilled by a system operating closer to its biological design capacity. This is not a cure. I want to be absolutely clear about that. This is a dietary strategy that the evidence strongly supports as creating a biological environment less hospitable to cancer establishment and growth, and more capable of identifying and responding to abnormal cellular changes. Those are different things. And the distinction matters. Now let me give you the exact protocol, because the mechanism only matters if you can implement it correctly. And implementation errors are the reason most people who attempt to incorporate turmeric see partial results at best. Here is the precise daily protocol based on what the clinical research actually tells us. Amount: 1 level teaspoon of high-quality ground turmeric. This delivers approximately 200 to 250 milligrams of curcumin. This is the dose range that appears consistently in the positive outcome clinical literature. This is where the first critical mistake gets made. Most people stop there. Curcumin has notoriously poor bioavailability when consumed alone. It is rapidly metabolized and excreted before it can reach systemic circulation in meaningful concentrations. Simply consuming turmeric without addressing bioavailability means you are getting a fraction of the benefit the research demonstrates. The solution is twofold and non-negotiable based on the pharmacokinetic evidence. First, always combine your turmeric with 1/4 teaspoon of freshly ground black pepper. Black pepper contains a compound called piperine. Piperine inhibits the intestinal enzymes and liver pathways responsible for rapid curcumin breakdown. The research is clear on this. Studies measuring curcumin blood levels with and without piperine co-administration found that piperine increased curcumin bioavailability by approximately 1,900%. Not 19%, 1,900%. That is the difference between a therapeutic dose and a dose that largely passes through you without meaningful absorption. Second, always consume your turmeric with a fat-containing food. Curcumin is fat-soluble, not water-soluble. It requires dietary fat to be properly absorbed through intestinal cell membranes. Consuming turmeric in a fat-free context, such as stirred into plain water, dramatically reduces absorption efficiency. A tablespoon of olive oil, a handful of nuts, a piece of fatty fish, or a full-fat dairy product all provide sufficient lipid content to facilitate proper curcumin absorption. Timing. Consume your daily turmeric dose with your first substantial meal of the day, breakfast or early lunch. There is emerging evidence from circadian biology suggesting that curcumin's interaction with NF-kappa B signaling pathways follows diurnal patterns, with morning consumption potentially offering superior modulation of inflammatory gene expression compared to evening consumption. The clinical evidence on timing is less robust than on the bioavailability factors, but the directional evidence favors morning deployment. Consistency. The mechanisms described do not operate as single-dose interventions. They operate on the timescale of sustained dietary patterns. The clinical trials showing meaningful immune activation and anti-inflammatory effects ran for 12 to 16 weeks minimum. Think of this as infrastructure building, not acute treatment. You are systematically creating a cellular environment that cancer cells find increasingly hostile, that requires consistency over weeks and months, not sporadic use. Now let me give you the clinical pearls from what the research and my review of patient outcomes consistently reveals. Pearl 1. Source quality matters enormously. Commercial ground turmeric varies dramatically in curcumin content, from as low as 1% to as high as 6% by weight. Verified source products with curcumin content testing are worth the modest additional cost. If your ground turmeric has no quality documentation and costs almost nothing, it is almost certainly at the lower end of curcumin content. Pearl 2. Heating turmeric in fat before consuming it. The cooking process used in traditional Indian cuisine for thousands of years actually enhances bioavailability compared to adding it to finished food. Briefly sauteing turmeric in a small amount of coconut oil or olive oil before incorporating it into a dish slightly increases the bioconversion of curcumin to more bioavailable metabolite forms. Traditional cultures discovered this empirically across millennia. The biochemistry explains why. Pearl 3, combining turmeric with quercetin-rich foods amplifies the NF-kappa B suppression effect. Quercetin, found abundantly in red onions, capers, and apples, operates through a partially overlapping but complementary anti-inflammatory pathway. Consuming both in the same meal creates additive inhibition of NF-kappa B activity beyond what either compound achieves alone. Pearl 4. Avoid consuming turmeric with antacids or proton pump inhibitors within 2 hours of each other. These medications alter gastric pH in ways that reduce piperine's ability to facilitate curcumin absorption. If you are on acid-reducing medications, time your turmeric protocol at least 2 hours away from your medication window. Now the mistakes. Because the mistakes matter as much as the protocol. Mistake 1. Consuming turmeric in tea or golden milk made with plant-based milks that have minimal fat content. Oat milk and almond milk are largely fat-free. The curcumin passes through without meaningful absorption. If you prefer a warm turmeric drink, Use full-fat coconut milk or add a teaspoon of coconut oil or ghee to ensure adequate lipid content for absorption. Mistake 2. Using turmeric supplements without piperine co-formulation and assuming they are equivalent to the food-based protocol. Many commercial curcumin supplements address bioavailability through various enhancement technologies, including liposomal formulation and phospholipid complexing. These can be effective, but many do not. Check the formulation before assuming a capsule delivers equivalent curcumin exposure to the properly prepared dietary protocol. Mistake 3. Inconsistency driven by the absence of immediate subjective feedback. Unlike caffeine or blood sugar effects, curcumin's mechanisms operate largely silently at the cellular level. You will not feel NF-kappa B suppression. You will not experience the sensation of natural killer cell activation. The absence of perceptible short-term feedback causes many people to abandon the protocol before the 16-week minimum threshold at which clinical effects become measurable. Consistency without immediate reward is the challenge this protocol requires. Mistake 4. Neglecting overall dietary context. Curcumin does not function as an isolated intervention that overrides a pro-inflammatory dietary pattern. If your diet is high in refined sugars, ultra-processed foods, and industrial seed oils, you are continuously activating the NF-kappa B pathways and creating the tumor-friendly microenvironment that curcumin is attempting to suppress. The compound works most powerfully within a broader anti-inflammatory dietary framework. It is a powerful tool. It is not a correction mechanism for an otherwise counterproductive dietary pattern. Let's bring all of this together clearly, because I want to make sure you leave this video with a complete picture. Your immune system is running a continuous cancer surveillance operation every day. The quality of that surveillance determines whether abnormal cells are identified and eliminated before they establish themselves, or whether they find the conditions they need to grow. That quality is substantially determined by your dietary choices. Curcumin, the active compound in turmeric, operates through 4 distinct and independently documented mechanisms to shift that balance in your favor. It suppresses NF-kappa B, reducing the chronic inflammatory environment that tumors exploit for growth. It reactivates apoptotic signaling, restoring the cellular self-destruction protocol that cancer cells have learned to suppress. It inhibits VEGF-driven angiogenesis, interrupting the tumor's ability to establish the blood supply it needs to grow. And it measurably increases natural killer cell activity and white blood cell populations, strengthening the immune surveillance network responsible for finding and eliminating abnormal cells. 1 teaspoon of high-quality ground turmeric, 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper, consumed with fat every morning for a minimum of 12 to 16 weeks. This is not complicated. It is not expensive. A month's supply of properly sourced ground turmeric costs less than a single restaurant meal. The biological infrastructure it helps maintain is responsible for your body's most fundamental cancer defense. I want to say something directly before I close. You have far more influence over your cellular environment than the conventional medical model communicates. That model, excellent at acute intervention when things go wrong, is often poorly equipped to convey the profound importance of daily dietary choices in shaping cancer risk over time. The research exists. The mechanisms are documented. What is missing is the translation of that research into daily practice. Your white blood cells are deployed right now. Your NF-kappa B pathways are either modulated or chronically active right now. Your tumor microenvironment is either hospitable or hostile to abnormal cell establishment right now. And the choices you make at tomorrow morning's breakfast table will send a specific set of molecular instructions into that biology. You can send different instructions starting tomorrow. Quick favor before you go. If you're not yet subscribed to this channel, could you take 2 seconds to check right now? It's free, and it means you'll see the research-based health content I publish without having to search for it. And if this information was useful to you today, please consider sharing it with someone in your life who deserves to have it. In my next video, I am going deep on a second dietary compound with independent peer-reviewed evidence for cancer cell biology modification, one that operates through completely different mechanisms and that synergizes specifically with what we covered today. If you want to build a comprehensive evidence-based dietary framework for cancer prevention, you will want to see that one.